Have you ever dealt with a situation where you felt, well, there's no way out? I'm just kind of wasting my time even talking about this. It's way bigger than me. It's much more than the resources that I have access to or can even get access to. I don't even know why I'm having this conversation because it's over. You ever had anything, any kind of thing like that ever, or you know anybody that have faced anything like that in their lifetime? Well, that's going to be kind of the subject of our lesson today. We're talking about David. We're talking about Goliath. We're talking about the faith of David when he faced Goliath. And I'm sure many of us have faced Goliath situations that God came in, and without the Lord, we would not have had any chance whatsoever of getting any kind of deliverance. I'm going to give a little context on our lesson today before we get into the lesson text. The events of today's text occurs sometime before 1010 BC, the year that Israel's kingship transitioned from Saul to David. And prior to the events of this lesson text, the prophet Samuel had anointed David to be king and to be Saul's successor. Having been rejected by the Lord, Saul's days as king were numbered. Even so, Saul still looked on David with favor, and he also went on to employ him. You read about that in 1 Samuel 16, verse 14 through 23. And David entered the army's encampment in 1 Samuel 17 as part of an episode of an Israelite war with the Philistines. And David was late to the war because he had been left to tend sheep. It's in 1 Samuel 17, verse 13 and 14. Now, after several weeks, the war degenerated into something of a standstill. And the Israelite army seemed ready to just break and run because they had real low morale. The reason for this low morale was the relentless insults of the Philistine giant named Goliath. And Goliath stood about 9 feet 9 inches tall, according to 1 Samuel 17, verses 4 to 10. And as our text began, David had heard about the insults, but he had also heard about the rewards for anyone that took care of this giant. And so he went down there and dealt with it. And he also had a lot of criticism from his older brothers because of his neglect of duty to attend the sheep. So here's a guy that was attending sheep that his brothers had scolded him, so to speak, for not doing his job, about to take on the biggest giant of his life or even the lives of the people and win. And our lesson starts right there. So let's kind of get right into it. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 31 through 37, we see here initiative. We see David's initiative. And then verse 31 through 32, we see a bold, courageous volunteer, the youngest of the group, the smallest in the group, but the one that had the favor of God on his life, named David. So verse 31 says, and when the words were heard, which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. Verse 32. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail him let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. So the words then which David spake was his volunteering to Goliath's challenge to a one-on-one fight, a one-on-one to go out there and duke it out, just one-on-one. Just think about how this looked. Now, David's a little bit small guy. The challenger guy 9.9 feet tall. So King Saul, at this point, had been already looking for a volunteer. And David's questions or inquiry was quickly passed up the chain of command, all the way up to the king. And when the king heard about it, the king sent for David. Let's read a little bit about this in 1 Samuel 17. And let me get 1 Samuel 17, verses 8 through 10. And I'm going to jump down to verse 25 and also verse 32. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants of Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. Verse 9, if he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. See, but he just knew he already had this thing in the bag. Verse 10, and the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Drop down to verse 25. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man that has come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. Drop down to verse 32. And David said to Saul, little David talking to the king now, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Man, that's a big, big deal right there. And so verse 32 then reveals something. Verse 32 reveals the emotional state. It reveals the low morale of the entire army. And low morale leads to something. Low morale leads to and results from fear, results from panic, making a decision because of how things look. All right, man, I just got a rough down here, so let's get up and get out of here. Fear will paralyze a child of God. Ain't that something? Y'all can have all this power and fear can paralyze. So David, a shepherd and a musician, but he was also a man of war. You read about this in 1 Samuel 16 and verse number 18. And the offer that he gave was not a timid offer. It was a direct offer. I'll do it. And an immediate offer. I'll take care of it. Let's look at verse 33. We see now a skeptical king. He was of what David had. Now David had initiative, but we also see the skepticism of King Saul. And Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. So King Saul was already very acquainted with David. We know about this in 1 Samuel 16, verses 14 to 23. And Saul's reference to David's youth may indicate that David was under 20 years old. So if he was under 20 years old, he was not even qualified to get into war. He was too young. You read about this ineligible rather, in Numbers chapter 1, verse 3, and Numbers chapter 26 and verse 2. So Saul could only see the difference. That's all he could see with his eyes. I'm looking at you, David. I'm looking at this Philistine, and listen, you don't go out here and commit suicide. You ain't got a chance. Well, he may have been true from a human standpoint. He didn't have a chance, but from a God standpoint, he had all he needed. And David had confidence, and his confidence really openly resisted the logic of the king. Confidence in God always can defeat logic. Now that don't even sound logical. But God and what God can do ain't logical, it's spiritual. So I look at verse 34, we see now a confident rejoinder. Okay, look at verse 34. And David, verse 34 and 35. But 34 through 37. But I'm going to read 34 and 35 here. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. Verse 35. And I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by the beard and smote him and slew him. Now, David now is given a resume, not a fabricated resume, a result-oriented resume. David's situation, the way David saluted the king was like this: thy servant. And that lets us know that David was very much aware that he was subservient to King Saul. Now King, I'm your servant, but I respectfully disagree. I'm gonna give a little pushback, and I know you're a little skeptical here because I'm a small guy, and this guy is a giant, and he's been fighting since he was a small guy. So he first established his capabilities by explaining how he dealt with two dangerous animals. So again, this wasn't just something he made up. You've seen folks that apply for a job, and you read the resume, and the resume is so extremely impressive. Then you meet the person, and you talk to the person, and you say, this resume and this person ain't the same people. Well, David wasn't that kind of guy. This wasn't a fabricated resume. David brought proof and talked about what he had just done to take care of a lamb that was in danger of two dangerous animals. So he established his credibility and capability right from the onset. Then we'll see the sequence of events as David explained in this real-life resume. First of all, he smote, then he delivered, and then he slew. This indicated David's intentions to make sure that the predator, the dangerous foes, were dead first. So then the time that would have been required to, first of all, deliver the lamb first before killing the predator would have decreased his danger, David's danger, but the lamb was going to probably be killed. So he had to do it in a way, in a sequence, in an order to make sure that all were safe. So this decision, that's another key word that David made, indicated this guy right here had the right heart. He was trying, first of all, let's make sure we remove this lamb from danger. And let's make sure that we destroy the predator so that the lambs are not in danger from this predator here, these two here, again. And that shows us the heart of David because he was concerned, real concerned for the lamb more so than he was concerned about his own self. That's what leaders do. I want to read something in John chapter 10, verses 11 through 13. I'm going to read this in the Amplified and the Living Version. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. A hired hand will run when he sees the wolf coming. He will abandon the sheep because they don't belong to him, and he isn't that shepherd. And so the wolf attacks them and scatters the flock. The hired hands run away because he's working only for the money and doesn't really care about the sheep. That wasn't the case with David. Anyone that's trying to strive to be a leader, you need to really look at your heart. We also see in verse 36, thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, saying he had defied the armies of the living God. So David just talked about his shepherd's qualifications. And his qualification as a shepherd really prepared him to really do three things: to take quick action without deliberation and procrastination, to do it with skill because he had done it in the field. He had on-the-job training, and to make a decision, to be decisive, not to sit there. See, when you're in war, in the active war, there's no time for conversation and deliberation. Oh, what you think about this? Well, you think you're gonna use? Well, if I use this and you use that, maybe we can fight a good fair fight. A fair fight in war. So he was able to make a decision, and all these things, being quick to act quick, and to have skill and to be decisive was necessary in combat, and David had that. So David said, uncircumcised Philistine. This was a very belittling statement. So David is saying, why are we? It's almost like he's saying, this is not even worthy of consideration. Why are we all talking about this guy like he's bigger than God? This ain't, I mean, let's go. Let's go. Let's go get him now. Uncircumcised Philistine is a thoroughly humiliating, belittling, looked down upon, not even worthy of talking about statement. So the phrase, then see that the phrase, the living God, stands in direct contrast to the idols that had no life, made by the hands of men, made out of wood and gold and silver. So there's no, these fabricated gods. Now look at David just building a case here. So I want you to read Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 14, Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 18, Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 19. There's only one God, and it's this God that Goliath had foolishly opposed. And he's going to find out how foolish this opposition against the one true and living God was, because it's going to cost him his life, and the people are going to run like little dogs tucked between under their tail. Okay, because God is going to make it real clear of who he was. You know, Joshua years before this event had already told them that the Israelites was going to know the living God was among them, because God was going to drive out their enemies, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, 7 nations altogether, Perizzites, all 7 of them altogether. You read about this in Joshua chapter 3 and verse number 10. So God showed himself strong many times years before this event today. And David knew that he knew that the God that he served was going to do it again. In verse 37, we see David said, moreover, the Lord had delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear. He will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. So a lion and a bear, they weighed anywhere from, they're big. They weighed anywhere from 265 to 550 pounds. The paws of a lion and a bear, you can see, but it conceals some deadly claws. If a lion strikes a person or a bear strikes a person, it can just cut him like a knife. And as small as David was, they could have cut him up just like, I mean, like you cutting up meat in a, just could have just really demolished him. Okay, and since the Lord delivered David from these more dangerous animals, these animals here specialize in ambush. What's an ambush? An ambush is a surprise attack. An ambush don't say, oh, hey, I'm coming. An ambush is a surprise, a sneak attack. And you look up, man, it's all over. And these animals here, that's what they did. They survived in the wild. They had to kill or be killed. They had to attack or be attacked. They had to kill to eat. They was ambushed. So if God protected him from these kind of animals, surely he was going to protect him against this non-ambush situation where this Goliath was in the wide open, taunting, talking about, insulting the people of God. So yeah, so David knew, well, if God delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear, surely he's gonna do the same thing against this uncircumcised Philistine. So the word also records another victory, you know, way before this victory here against the Philistine. And this fight had been set in motion by just 2 people, 2 Israelites, 2 of God's people. And by God's help, these two defeated 20 Philistines. Isn't that something? You see, I don't care if it's 5 times as many, 10 times more, or 20 times more. When God is on a child of God's side, what they come against doesn't even matter, y'all. Now, I know that's easier said than done, but listen, it's the truth. God made heaven and earth by his great power and stretched out arm, and there's nothing too hard for him to do. I want you to read 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 6 through 15 about that story. So David then expected, that's another key word, the Lord to do the same thing for him, expected, because he knew that God has a track record. He's done it many times before. He's done it for me. Can y'all think of anything God has done for you that you forgot about it? But at that time, it looks like it was unsurmountable, impenetrable, impossible. But God, that's the same God that we serve now. And so our job then is to say, Lord, please, I believe, but help my unbelief, because you're still God and you're still able to do more than I can even ask or think, way above anything and I can even imagine, because you're God. In verse 37b, that was 37a, we still see a confident guy. Confident rejoiner is what the commentary calls it. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with you. Go, and the Lord be with you. Go. So Saul realized at this point, before this point, that he no longer himself as king had the favor of God on his life. But his petition on the behalf of David seems to be real. You can read about this, and I'm kind of running out of time here now. And yeah, we just about to run out of time. Read about this in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 10. Well, let me read it real quick. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel saying, that's 1 Samuel 15 and 10. Drop down to verse 26. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. Drop down to verse number chapter 16 and verse 14. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. Listen to this. And an evil spirit from the Lord tormented and terrified him. Boy, I ain't got time to give you no commentary on that, because I'm about to run out of time. But God is not limited to what he can do and use to get our attention. Anybody's attention. And God is not dependent on any one person. So if you think you all that in a bag of chips. So the words of Saul then is a reaffirmation of what had already been told. He had already been told about David, and how David now had the favor of the Lord on his side. That's in chapter 16 of 1 Samuel and verse 18. So this prayer expression gives us some kind of inside look into Saul's belief that the Lord was going to still act on behalf of Israel, his people. So that should let any leader know that the Lord is always going to take care of his flock. Now, the leader can do something that's wrong and do something that's outside of God's will and outside of God's way, but God is going to still take care of his flock. Ain't that something? So no one person can say, well, now, Lord, if I'm not here, the program's not going to get over. I mean, they just going to fold and go away. No, not hardly. Drop down to verse 45. We see also the outcome of this battle and how the Philistine, how he talked to David. So look at verse 45. Then said David to the Philistine, thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. Now look at something here now. David didn't say, I come to you with a slingshot and a rock and a stone. David wasn't dependent on the sling and the rock. But David also goes on to mention what Goliath had and what Goliath depended on. Goliath had a sword, a spear, and a shield. And he had all this armor on him. And so he was dependent upon what he had more so than what David depended upon, which was the Lord. He relied on his skills. How many of us were relying on our education, relying on our networking abilities, our contacts, and not relying on the Lord who controls everything, controls your contact, controls your ability to retain information, to get your education and all your academic disciplines, your advanced degrees. The Lord gave all of us the ability to do whatever we've achieved is because he gave it to us. But he can, just like that, you can lose that. So we have to always depend on the Lord because he is the source. All this other stuff is just the resources, but he is the source. So don't get it twisted. Now you can look at how big this stuff was that Goliath had, all of his equipment, all of his weaponry. You can read about that in 1 Samuel 17, verse 5 to 7. It looked intimidating to all the other people. But the question is, what do you see? David didn't see like they saw. David saw what God could do. They saw what the giant could do. So the question is, do you see like they see, or do we see like David saw? Man, that's a pretty big deal right there. So the title then, the God of the armies of Israel, is kind of unique in this passage right here and in the pages of the Old Testament. The name of the Lord of hosts is a military language. The name of the Lord of hosts, because he's a God of hosts. He can fight and also have fights completed and won on our behalf. David had great assurance then, class. He had great assurance in knowing that God was over all things and all beings, but nothing that God could not do. And it was this God that Goliath had disrespected, had blasphemed. The God, the God of hosts, the God of over the armies of Israel. It was this God that he came up against. I want you to also read about the situation where this happened, a similar case happened where God fought for them and defeated the Assyrians in a big time way. I want you to read 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 28 through 35, chapter 19 of also that same book, verses 4 through 6, and verses 22 through 23. And we're about to run out of time here. And so we gotta bring it on home now. So old Baptist preacher said, we gotta bring it on home now. Good evening. So in verse 48, 49, and 50, let's read all of them. We see the combatants' movement, Goliath's movement. We see David's victory in these last few verses here. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and a sling and sling it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. And David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, and there was no sword in the hand of David. So before this battle even got started, David already knew he was going to cut this guy's head off. Before he even got started, but he didn't have anything to do with it. So he knew he was going to cut his head off. But so the Bible said there was no sword in David's hand. So to cut the guy's head off, Goliath's head off, David had to take his own knife. Let me use the street term. Had to take his own switchblade and cut his head off. Isn't that something? Took his knife and whipped him, killed him, cut his head off. So the battle, this battle then gave validation that David was anointed as king. And David also was going to replace King Saul in this anointing. You read about this in 1 Samuel 16, verses 1 through 13. And this wasn't going to be the last time that David was going to use Goliath's sword. God is so powerful, class, that God can allow his child to take what the enemy was going to use against them and use it to defeat the enemy, and give it to the child of God to defeat the enemy. I mean, just like on your job, there are some folks that are talking about you and lying on you. That there are some of your supervisors and your leaders that's doing this, plotting against you because they're jealous of you. God can use them and get you promoted. Ain't that something? God can take a negative situation and turn the negative into a positive and multiply it by 10, because that's the kind of God that we serve. He's omnipotent. He's omnipresent. He's omniscient. He's Alpha and Omega. He's the beginning and the end, which was, which is, and which is to come. God has always existed. God is eternal, infinite. There's no beginning and no ending. He's always was, always is, and that God dwells on the inside of us. And we are out of time. Y'all have a great rest of the week. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week for our next Sunday School review. Y'all take care.